What's going on, everyone? So Cam Payne was recently released by the San Antonio Spurs so that he could go to a team that is a contender rather than staying with a team that is kind of in rebuild mode, kind of trying to figure stuff out. Obviously, they have Victor Wembanyama, and Cam Payne is a guy that could actually make an impact for many teams. He's not like a starting level point guard by any stretch of the imagination, but he is a guy that can give you, 10 points, 5 assists a game. He shot about 42% from the field last season. He's still only 29 years old, so he's on the right side of 30, but at 6'1" size, he's a little undersized to be playing like the point guard, shooting guard position. But again, guy that can come in and actually make a solid impact for many rosters. He also shot 37% last year for Phoenix from 3 on 4 attempts, so that would be good. But career-wise, he's kind of had like hit or miss seasons, although for his career, he's around 36%. If he could be that in a backup point guard role, that could make a lot of sense. But ever since he was waived, many people have said, hey, what about the Lakers, right? The Lakers are a contending team. Cam could go to a contending team and could kind of fill in that 15th roster spot. Now, there are pros and cons in both ways, and I kind of want to touch on them. For the obvious points are like, hey, we have DLO, you have Gabe Vincent, Austin Reeves wants to play point guard more. The Lakers want to allow Austin Reeves to play point guard more. And you also have LeBron James. So it doesn't make a world of sense to go and get another point guard, especially a 6'1" point guard, and have him come in. He would literally be the smallest player on the Lakers roster, and that's one thing that's really good about the Lakers. But one sort of positive caveat with that is one position that is lacking for the Lakers is the 2 guard, right? Well, what you could do if you wanted to is bring in Cameron Payne, and then you have Austin Reeves at the 2 guard, and then also D'Angelo Russell, who could play the 2 guard. And his ability to play off the ball, and you can kind of just strictly turn him into a scorer, which is something that I've talked about here on this channel before. The idea of, instead of D'Lo having to focus on not only just playmaking, but also scoring, if he just focuses on just being a scorer, what could that do for him? Now, I wouldn't start Cameron Payne over D'Lo, but maybe Gabe Vincent. There's a lot of talks about Gabe Vincent and D'Lo kind of battling for that starting role. I also think you can make an argument that Gabe Vincent makes more sense in the starting unit alongside LeBron James and Austin Reeves. That can kind of allow Reeves and LeBron to be the primary ball handlers. You have Gabe Vincent starting the point guard position just for the sake of starting the point guard position, but he's not the playmaker that D'Lo is or even Reeves is, where he's more of kind of like that 3-and-D style guy, good playing off the ball. You could, again, have Reeves and LeBron handle the duties of playmaker, and then he can just kind of focus on guarding the opposing team's point guards as well as knocking down the 3 ball. You have him alongside Reeves, LeBron, AD. They start Wood, or they go Rui, or they go Vando, whatever. You go Vando and you have basically your 3 best defensive guys per position on the floor, and Vincent, Vando, and Anthony Davis. That could be pretty solid. And then you'd have Cam Payne and D'Lo coming off the bench, and D'Lo slotting into that 2 guard. You could still run D'Lo and Reeves together at times. You could even theoretically go Payne and Vincent at times if you wanted to, because again, Vincent's so good off the ball. So there is that sort of idea of like, well, there's no other 2 guards that make a lot of sense. Go get another point guard, and then D'Lo, he can kind of slide over and play the 2. He's a guy that's 17 points per game. What can he be if he just focuses on scoring, right? Could he get to 22, 23 points for the Lakers? That is something that is very achievable, especially with how efficient he shot the basketball with the Lakers. You imagine that he should be able to keep that efficiency just playing alongside LeBron James, Austin Reeves, Anthony Davis, Christian Wood now, things like that. But the biggest thing that I think would make sense and the argument for getting Cam Payne, and before I dive in this, I want to say I don't think the Lakers should get Cam Payne. I even thought about like not even talking about it. That's why it's been like days since then. But I kind of thought about it, kind of dwelled on it a little bit, and was like, you know what? This could be a logical reason as to why to bring Cam Payne. So if the idea really is to trade D'Angelo Russell, right? If the rumors and speculation do inevitably turn out to be true, it would be good to have Cam Payne on that roster for the point guard depth. Because let's say, again, just throwing out an idea here, let's say you trade DLO and Rui for DeMar DeRozan, Andre Drummond, something like that, right? Just, again, throwing out names. Don't take it too literal. But let's say it's something like that, right? Well, you lose D'Lo. Yes, you have Reeves. Yes, you have LeBron. Yes, you have Gabe Vincent. But LeBron doesn't really want to play on the ball very much. Austin Reeves can obviously play point guard alongside DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan can also make some plays. But if you had a guy in Cam Payne, then you just have that guard depth if needed, where if, let's say, a Gabe Vincent ends up getting an injury, an untimed injury, or say, whomever gets an untimed injury. The only way that like Cam Payne wouldn't make sense to sign if the Lakers did a trade is if the Lakers traded for another type of point guard, right? Like, again, just an example, let's say Kyrie, right? If Kyrie becomes available, then it doesn't make as much sense to have signed Cam Payne. However, if you did get Kyrie, it would depend on what are you giving up, right? Like if you end up trading, say, D'Lo and Gabe Vincent to go get a guy, right, because you don't want to trade Rui or whatever, then sure, that makes more sense. But I think if you're trading for anything other than a guy that can play point guard, right, Damian Lillard, Kyrie, whomever, right, Trae Young is another name that's been kind of thrown out there. If you're trading for any of those guys, then Cam Payne makes zero sense. But if you are trading for somebody else, a Debo, a Zach LaVine, whatever, right? Something along those lines, or maybe even another center, right? What if you trade for like a Valanciunas? Let's not even use other stars. Let's just use a guy that could make sense for the Lakers, right? Let's say Valanciunas. You go and you trade for him and you give up D'Lo to get that. Well, then now Cam Payne does make more sense because, again, now you keep Reeves at the 2. He can play point in spots, but you have Cam Payne, who is a good sort of just playmaker. He can knock down the 3 ball a little bit, and he's also a solid defensive guard, which would be nice. Right now you have Gabe Vincent and Cam Payne, who, if either are on the court at times, both can be good defensive players. He's not like elite by any stretch, but he was slightly better than league average. Last year, league average was around a 115 defensive rating. He was at a 114.6, which sounds marginal, but that's the difference between a like really good defensive player and a bad defensive player, right? Like when you look at like where guys rank, right, a 0.1% difference could be the difference between you being top 10 defensively or top, 50 defensively. So yes, it doesn't sound like a huge difference, but it actually is. It's solid. And look, I like Cam Payne as a player. There's also the questions with like him and LeBron, right? Like LeBron telling him to humble himself, and they kind of had that little spat. Although you kind of look at that as just like it's something in passing, but it is something worth at least mentioning and noting. But it's just, look, I don't believe the Lakers are going to sign Cam Payne. I don't want the Lakers to sign Cam Payne. If they did sign Cam Payne, then in my opinion, that means they're trading D'Angelo Russell at some point. That's the idea, right? If you go and sign Cameron Payne, then then that tells me Rob Pelinka truly believes that he is going to go and trade D'Lo at some point this season. And that could be bad because how does D'Lo perceive that? Does D'Lo perceive that as, oh, they brought him in because they're going to trade me, right? And if there was no conversation early on, right? Like what I mean by that is, let's say D'Lo, when he signed his contract and waived the no trade clause, Rob Pelinka told him up front, hey, we're probably going to look to trade you. We'll try to send you to a destination that you like. If there was already that understanding going in, which I don't believe that there would have been, but you never know, right? They had to have talked to him and convinced him to waive the no trade clause. And I'm sure that was something that was brought up of like, why do you want me to waive this, right? Are you planning on trading me? Right. And my guess is that the response for Rob Pelinka was like, no, we're not planning on trading you, but we need the flexibility. If a trade that makes sense comes up, then we will. But if we're not just going to trade you, just trade you. I'm sure that it was somewhere along those lines. But if you bring in Cameron Payne, then that pretty much tells you everything you need to know. Now, could the Lakers bring him in on like a training camp deal just to kind of get a good look at him and see? Maybe. Right? And maybe, like I mentioned earlier, if your intention is to have DLO at the 2, right? And kind of tell DLO, like, how would you feel about just being a scorer, just being a shooter, not really having to worry about playmaking, right? Because we're probably not going to be able to bring in a better scorer at a vet minimum than you are. So we could bring in Cam Payne as like a point guard, and then you could play primarily the 2. Maybe we start you at the point, the first 5 minutes or whatever. And then from there, you're just strictly the 2 guard, the backup 2. That is definitely a possibility. But Cam Payne would also have to be willing to understand and accept whatever role is asked of him, right? Like that's a thing. Like, is he going to want to go to a team where he could play as many minutes as possible? But even then, what team is that, right? Like how many contending teams are looking at this and going like, oh man, Cam Payne is a solid point guard. And how many contending teams need another point guard? There's very few, if any. I mean, even the Lakers don't really need a point guard, but it's just D'Lo is so good off the ball, it would make sense to make him the 2. Out of all the positions on the Lakers roster, the 2 guard is the thinnest now, especially now after the Lakers went and acquired, Christian Wood. I don't know. It's not something that like I would lock in, but it wouldn't shock me if that's something that they do. I don't think they'll do it. I don't really want them to do it, but I've seen a lot of conversation about this. Seen a lot of people kind of bring it up, mention it, talk about it. And so I figured like, hey, all right, fine. Let's dive into a little bit and look at some of the pros and cons. But again, however you feel, whatever your thoughts are, as always, this is a discussion. So I want to hear from you. Let me know down